There comes a moment in life when you realize that nothing changes until you do. Not your environment, not your relationships, not your results. Most people spend their lives trying to prove that they are worthy, as if worth is something that must be earned, negotiated, or approved by others. They wait for the right moment, the right achievement, or the right recognition before they allow themselves to feel confident. But this way of living quietly drains your energy because it places your value in the hands of things that are unstable and constantly changing. One day you feel good because things go well, and the next day you question everything because something didn't work out. This creates a cycle where your sense of self rises and falls with outcomes. And over time, it becomes exhausting. The truth is much simpler, but also more difficult to accept at first. Your worth is not something you build from the outside. It is something you recognize from within, before any result, before any validation, before any external proof. There is a baseline value that already exists. When you start from this understanding, your actions begin to change. You no longer approach opportunities from a place of needing them to complete you. Instead, you engage with them as an extension of who you already are. This shift may seem subtle, but it transforms everything about how you show up. When you act from a place of already being enough, your decisions become clearer. You stop overthinking every move because you are no longer trying to protect a fragile identity. You are not constantly asking, "What if I fail?" in a way that paralyzes you. Instead, failure becomes information, not a judgment of your worth. You begin to take actions that align with growth, rather than actions that are designed to avoid discomfort. This is where real progress begins, because you are no longer limited by the fear of losing something that was never dependent on outcomes in the first place. There is also a quiet confidence that comes with this understanding. It is not loud or forceful, and it does not need to prove itself. It is steady. When you speak, there is less hesitation. When you move, there is less doubt. People may not always be able to explain it, but they can feel it. They sense that you are not seeking approval. And because of that, your presence carries more weight. This does not come from pretending to be confident. It comes from removing the belief that you are lacking something to begin with. At the same time, this way of thinking requires responsibility. If your worth is not tied to results, then you can no longer use failure as an excuse to shrink. You cannot say, "I am not good enough," and stop trying. Instead, you acknowledge that while your worth remains constant, your skills, habits, and mindset can always improve. This creates a healthy separation between who you are and what you are working on. You can refine your actions without attacking your identity. For example, imagine someone applying for a job they truly want. If they believe their worth depends on getting that job, every step of the process becomes heavy. They second-guess their application, overanalyze every word in the interview, and if they are rejected, they take it as proof that they are not good enough. But if they start from the belief that they are already worthy, their approach changes. They still prepare seriously, they still give their best effort, but they do not attach their identity to the outcome. If they get the job, they move forward with confidence. If they don't, they reflect, improve, and apply again without collapsing internally. Their sense of self remains steady, and because of that, their growth continues uninterrupted. This is the difference between chasing worth and acting from it. One keeps you stuck in hesitation, while the other moves you forward with clarity and strength. Even when the path is uncertain, the way you carry yourself is constantly communicating something, even when you are silent. Before you speak a single word, your posture, your pace, your tone, and your presence are already shaping how others respond to you. Most people underestimate this, believing that outcomes are driven only by what they say or what they do. But there is a deeper layer at work. Your internal state, the way you think and feel about yourself, quietly influences every external result you experience. When you move through life with uncertainty, it shows in subtle ways. You hesitate before making decisions. You second guess your choices, and you often look to others for confirmation. This creates a pattern where people begin to treat you based on the signals you are sending, not because they are trying to diminish you, but because they are responding to the energy you project. If your actions suggest doubt, the world reflects hesitation back to you. Opportunities feel harder to grasp. Conversations feel less impactful, and even simple decisions become heavier than they need to be. On the other hand, when you begin to move with clarity and confidence, the response you receive starts to shift. This does not mean everything suddenly becomes easy, but there is a noticeable difference in how situations unfold. You speak with more intention, which makes others listen more carefully. You act with more certainty, which reduces confusion and builds trust. Even your silence becomes more powerful because it is no longer filled with insecurity, but with awareness. People tend to respect those who appear grounded, not because they are perfect, but because they are consistent in how they show up. This connection between your inner state and your outer reality is not something mystical or abstract. It is practical and observable. Consider how you behave when you feel completely sure about something. Your body language becomes more open, your voice becomes more stable, and your decisions come faster. Now compare that to a moment when you feel unsure. You might avoid eye contact. Your voice may become softer or uneven, and you delay taking action. These differences may seem small, but over time, they create very different outcomes. It is also important to understand that your energy does not only affect how others see you, it affects how you see situations. When you are grounded and confident, challenges appear as problems to solve rather than threats to avoid. You become more resourceful, more focused, and more willing to take responsibility. But when your energy is rooted in fear or doubt, even simple tasks can feel overwhelming. You start to anticipate negative outcomes, and this anticipation often shapes your behavior in a way that brings those outcomes closer. There is a discipline required to maintain a strong internal state. It does not come from forcing yourself to feel confident all the time, but from becoming aware of your patterns and choosing how you respond. When doubt appears, you do not let it control your actions. You notice it, but you continue to move with intention. Over time, this builds a new baseline where confidence is not something you switch on occasionally, but something that becomes part of how you operate. For example, think about someone entering an important meeting. If they walk in feeling unprepared internally, even if they have the right information, their delivery may lack impact. They might rush their words, avoid contributing, or hold back ideas that could have been valuable. But if they enter with a calm and steady mindset, they present the same information with clarity and presence. They listen more effectively, respond more thoughtfully, and create a stronger impression without needing to force anything. This is how your energy shapes your reality. It influences not only how others interact with you, but also how you interact with the world. Over time, these interactions compound, creating a pattern that either supports your growth or limits it, depending on how you choose to show up each day. Most people spend a large part of their lives unconsciously looking for approval. It can be obvious in some moments and extremely subtle in others, but the pattern is the same. Before making decisions, they imagine how others will react. While speaking, they adjust their words based on imagined judgment. Even in silence, they carry an internal question. Am I doing this right in the eyes of others? Over time, this creates a quiet dependence where self-worth becomes tied to external validation. The problem is that approval is never stable. It changes depending on people, situations, and perspectives. If your sense of self depends on something unstable, then your inner state will always feel unstable as well. When you begin to release the need for validation, something fundamental shifts in the way you experience life. You stop filtering every action through the lens of how it will be received. Instead, you start asking a different question. Is this aligned with what I know to be right for me? This shift may seem small, but it changes the direction of your decisions. You are no longer reacting to imagined opinions. You are responding to your own clarity. At first, this can feel uncomfortable because the mind is used to seeking reassurance. But slowly, a different kind of confidence starts to develop, one that does not rely on constant external confirmation. Seeking validation often leads to hesitation. When you need approval before acting, you delay action until you feel safe enough. And that safety is usually defined by external acceptance. This creates a pattern where your growth is slowed by the opinions of others. You may have ideas, intentions, or goals, but they remain unexpressed until they are approved internally by fear-based thinking. Over time, this weakens your ability to trust yourself. The more you rely on others to confirm your choices, the less you practice making decisions independently. When validation is no longer the driving force, decision-making becomes clearer. You begin to understand that not everyone will agree with your path, and that is not a problem to solve. It is a natural part of individuality. Different perspectives will always exist, and trying to align with all of them is impossible. Once you accept this, you stop bending yourself to fit expectations that were never meant for you. Instead, you focus on consistency with your own values and direction. There is also a quiet strength that develops when you stop seeking approval. You become less reactive to criticism and less dependent on praise. Compliments no longer define your confidence, and criticism no longer destroys it. You start to see both as information rather than identity. This creates emotional stability because your internal state is no longer constantly shifting based on external feedback. You can receive feedback without losing your center. In social situations, this change becomes noticeable. You are no longer over-explaining yourself to be understood. You are not forcing agreement or trying to convince others to see things your way. Instead, you communicate clearly and allow space for different perspectives. Some will understand, some will not, but your sense of direction remains unchanged. This reduces unnecessary tension in interactions because you are no longer trying to control how others perceive you. For example, Imagine someone who enjoys creating content or sharing ideas. If they are driven by validation, every post, video, or message becomes a source of anxiety. They constantly check reactions, compare themselves to others, and adjust their expression based on what seems popular. Their creativity becomes restricted by fear of judgment. But if they move beyond validation, they create with more freedom. They still care about quality, but they are no longer controlled by approval or rejection. They express ideas because they believe in them, not because they need them to be accepted. Over time, this way of operating builds trust in oneself. You begin to rely less on external signals and more on internal clarity. The need for constant reassurance fades, and in its place, a quieter, more stable form of confidence emerges, one that does not depend on being seen a certain way to remain intact. Fear and hesitation are natural parts of human experience, but they become limiting only when they are allowed to control action. Most people misunderstand courage as the absence of fear, when in reality, courage is the decision to act despite fear being present. Growth does not wait for complete certainty. It does not appear when everything feels safe or fully understood. It begins in moments where you move forward, even when your mind is uncertain, even when outcomes are unclear, and even when comfort is pulling you in the opposite direction. When you rely too heavily on fear, your world becomes smaller. Over time, you begin to avoid situations that could help you grow simply because they feel uncomfortable. You delay decisions, postpone opportunities, and wait for a sense of readiness that rarely arrives in the way you expect. This creates a cycle where inaction reinforces doubt. The longer you wait, the more convincing the fear becomes, even if there is no real evidence that you cannot handle the situation. Action breaks this cycle, not perfect action, not fully confident action, but action itself. When you move forward despite uncertainty, you create experience, and experience slowly replaces imagination. Many fears exist only in the mind, built from assumptions about what might happen. But once you act, you begin to see reality for what it actually is, not what you imagined it to be. This shift is powerful because it grounds you in truth rather than projection. There is also something important that happens internally when you choose action over fear. You begin to build self-trust. Every time you act despite hesitation, you send a message to yourself that you are capable of handling discomfort. Over time, this strengthens your confidence, not through words or motivation, but through evidence. You start to remember past moments where you moved forward and survived, adapted, or even succeeded. This memory becomes a foundation for future action. Avoiding fear, on the other hand, weakens self-trust. Each time you step back from an opportunity because it feels difficult or uncertain, you reinforce the belief that fear should be listened to. The mind learns that hesitation equals safety, even if it also means stagnation. This is how people become stuck, not because they lack ability, but because they have trained themselves to retreat instead of engage. Acting through fear does not mean ignoring it or pretending it does not exist. It means acknowledging its presence without allowing it to decide your direction. Fear will often appear when you are about to step into something new or meaningful. It is not always a sign of danger. Often, it is a sign of growth. The unfamiliar naturally triggers resistance because the mind prefers known patterns. But familiarity is not always aligned with progress. For example, Imagine someone who wants to improve their communication skills, but feels nervous speaking in front of others. If they wait until the fear disappears completely, they may never start. The fear will continue to feel valid because it is never challenged. But if they choose to speak anyway, even imperfectly, they begin to learn through experience. The first attempt may feel uncomfortable, the second slightly less so, and over time, the fear loses its intensity as confidence grows through repetition. This is how transformation happens, not in a single moment of courage, but in repeated decisions to act even when doubt is present. Each action builds momentum, and that momentum slowly reshapes how you see yourself. You stop identifying as someone who is limited by fear and start recognizing yourself as someone who moves through it. Eventually, action becomes more natural than hesitation. Fear may still appear, but it no longer holds the same authority over your decisions. Instead of stopping you, it simply becomes a signal that you are stepping into something unfamiliar, something that has the potential to expand your capabilities and reshape your understanding of what you are capable of becoming. So, in the end, the path forward is not about eliminating doubt, but about refusing to be ruled by it. Doubt may appear, fear may rise, and uncertainty may follow you at different stages of life. But none of these are stronger than your ability to act. What defines you is not the presence of hesitation, but your response to it. When you choose to move anyway, something within you begins to shift. You stop waiting for perfect conditions and start working with the reality in front of you. You stop identifying as someone who needs to feel ready and start becoming someone who creates readiness through action. With every step taken despite fear, you build a deeper trust in yourself, and that trust becomes stronger than any temporary emotion. Life does not open up for those who only think about change. It opens for those who participate in it, even when they are unsure. And slowly, through consistent action, fear loses its control, doubt loses its voice, and hesitation loses its grip. What remains is clarity, strength, and a quiet inner stability that comes from knowing you did not stop when it was uncomfortable. And from that place, movement is no longer forced. It becomes natural.